Hello, and welcome to this third Sunday of Lent. We're just about midway in our journey towards Easter, and in looking at the readings, I chose the theme from the ashes in the desert to freedom. We begin by looking at our first reading this Sunday from the book of Deuteronomy. The Israelites are receiving the law, the 10 commandments that we all came to know as children. But the reason why those 10 commandments were given, we have to understand what happened with the Israelites beforehand. So the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for over 430 years. Naturally, over that much time, many of the customs of their traditions were lost or intertwined with the Egyptian practices. So their culture, their customs, their way of dressing, many of these things would have been natural to the Israelites during that time. And God in his goodness and generosity leads them from slavery and wants to lead them into a land of freedom. So what happens in the desert that causes them to have to wait an additional 40 years to enter into the promised land? So we need to understand that during this time, they had much to understand and learn about God, that they were brought out of slavery, but they didn't know anything else but what it was to be a slave. So they had to learn how to think for themselves, how to care for one another, how to lead. They also had to learn how to follow their one God, where in Egyptian culture, they had multiple gods. And so now, as they're being led into freedom by the one true God, they're having to learn who this one God is and learn how to love and worship him. 40 years was not time spent in vain, but it was God training his people how to be his and his alone. So in that first reading today, a very pivotal moment for the Hebrews to receive the law of God. And in that receiving the law, they're given the first taste of what freedom has. We all know that true freedom isn't to be able to do whatever we want, but it is grounded in law that is rooted in our human condition, in the natural law, where God didn't have to write, "You should not kill your brother." That is a natural law that is distasteful to any human being to want to kill. But God spelled these simple laws out as a governance for the people that they might live well their freedom. So in the gospel then, we see that this is a time way after they've entered the promised land and they have settled down and have a more sedentary life built around the temple. And animals are being sold in the entry to the temple, animals that would be used for the sacrifice. The sacrifice which they learned from God while they were in the desert. But now we see Jesus entering the temple and knowing that this sacrifice, these laws of buying and selling, were not what God intended for his people. And so he, in his righteous anger, drives them out, drives the sellers out, wanting to restore the beauty of the people's sacrifice to honor and love God. We need to look then as to where that honor comes from is a virtue of fear of the Lord. And what does it mean when we have laws but have no fear? This kind of a fear is one out of reverence. It's knowing that the law is good because the one who created us gave us the law. So to keep the commandments out of this reverence and not out of fear is to honor God. Then we also see that it is more than this, that when we keep the commandments, it is also an act of love. This is where we find our true freedom, our true promised land. Midpoint of Lent, this is where we are. And Jesus in his journey, we can imagine him going up to Jerusalem to face what he knows awaits him, where he is going to give his life as ransom for us all. He is going to be the perfect sacrifice, the Paschal Lamb. So here in this midpoint of our journey, we also have to decide where we're at. We began Lent with the ashes of repentance, preparing to enter the desert of the Lenten journey to a fruitful and new Easter. So it's a time we can be like the Israelites in the desert. They wandered for 40 years, partially out of their own stubbornness of heart. Imagine that you've been journeying from slavery to freedom, and you're sitting on the hills right outside the promised land. You can almost taste the victory of receiving that new land. But because of members of your group who are fearful, they lie about the possibility of success in taking the land. The people are fearful and do not trust God after all the wonders and miracles he has shown them in the desert. It is at this point that their journey in the desert continues. We're sitting at this point in our Lenten reflection. We're looking after the journey we began on Ash Wednesday, knowing that we have a little ways longer to go. And we have a choice to either pull back, telling ourselves it's too hard, or we can actually step up our game and enter into these last few weeks growing in our Lenten practice, trying to grow closer to the Lord through our prayer, through our sacrifices, and through our penance. So like the Israelites at the gate at the promised land, we can make a choice to seek God more fully in these last few weeks. The next couple of weeks, let us walk with Jesus up to Jerusalem. They say that his face was set like flint towards what he knew would come. Our face too can be set with a firmness of heart to walk with Jesus, knowing that when we reach the promised land of Easter, that we will be renewed in our Christian faith. May you enjoy the rest of your Lenten journey and know that I'm praying for you. God bless you.